All right, let's dive right into Acts chapter 13. This part of the Bible is a huge turning point in the story. It's got a ton of action, a few quotes that are honestly kind of confusing, and it gives us this grand vision of God's plan for the whole world. So, if you've been following the story of Acts, you know it's been all about the church in Jerusalem, right? Peter's been the main guy, but then you hit chapter 13, and bam, the camera just swings right over to the Apostle Paul. Everything changes. The focus explodes from this local thing to a mission for the entire world. And to make this massive point about Jesus defeating death, Paul reaches back into the Old Testament and pulls out, well, a really bizarre quote. I mean, it seems like it has absolutely nothing to do with the resurrection. It's a real head-scratcher. You kind of have to ask, what on earth was he getting at? Okay, so Paul is in the middle of this big speech about the resurrection. And to make his case, he quotes Psalm 2, "You are my son, today I have begotten you." Now, begotten, that just means born. So, wait a minute. How does being born explain rising from the dead? Those two things seem like polar opposites, right? It feels like a total contradiction. And that is the big puzzle we're tackling today. Seriously, this thing has had scholars debating for ages. What was going through Paul's mind? And what is he trying to tell us about Jesus with this weird connection? I mean, think about the implications here. If Jesus was begotten or born at the resurrection, does that mean he wasn't God's son before then? You can see how this gets complicated fast. All of a sudden, you're looking at what seems like a massive problem for one of the most basic beliefs in Christianity. Yeah, if you just take that verse at face value, you could end up with an idea called adoptionism. That's an old heresy, basically saying Jesus was just a regular guy who was so good that God adopted him as his son. The early church shot this down, and for good reason. It just doesn't line up with the rest of the Bible's teaching about who Jesus is.
Okay, so if Paul's not an adoptionist, what is he trying to say? Well, to crack this code, we've got to become detectives and look for clues in his other letters. That's where we'll find the key.
And here's the absolute key. It's the difference between becoming the son and being validated as the son. See, Paul isn't saying the resurrection is the moment Jesus was made the son. No way. He's saying it's the ultimate public proof, the big reveal, that he always was the son. It's the validation of an identity he had from eternity. And we see him build this exact logic in other places. Like, look at the book of Romans. He says Jesus was declared to be the Son of God in power by his resurrection. Did you catch that? Declared. It's not about becoming something new. It's about publicly showing what was already true. The sheer power it takes to conquer death, that's the ultimate mic drop, the final proof of who he is. So, that word begetting, Paul is using it as a metaphor, not literally. Think about it. A birth brings a new kind of life into the world. In the same way, the resurrection was God bringing a new kind of glorified life out of death. It's about a new beginning, a new state of being that proved his identity once and for all. All right, so I think we've cracked that first puzzle. Now that we have that method down, looking at the context, let's use it on another tricky phrase that shows up just a little bit later in the same chapter. So Paul's talking about King David, and he says David fell asleep. Now, a lot of people read that and immediately think of something called soul sleep. The idea that when you die, your soul just goes dark, totally unconscious, until the final resurrection. And yeah, soul sleep is a pretty common idea. But if we just look a little closer at the full verse, there's a huge clue hiding in plain sight that points in a completely different direction. See, the key word here isn't actually asleep. That's just a metaphor. The real key, the thing that unlocks the whole meaning, is the phrase that comes right after it. Right, and was laid with his fathers. Now, that might sound like just a poetic way of saying he was buried, but it was so much more than that. It points to a real, ancient practice that actually tells us exactly what they believed about the afterlife. This is fascinating. Archaeologists have found that this laid with his fathers thing was often about a process called secondary burial. So if someone died far away from their family tomb, their body would be, defleshed, so that just the bones were left. And then those bones would be carried back and placed in the family tomb. The whole point of this really intense ritual was the belief that the person's spirit was consciously, right then and there, joining their ancestors. It was all about a reunion, not about taking a long unconscious nap.
So this idea of a conscious afterlife, of being with your people, it wasn't just a comforting thought. It was rooted in this deep trust that God is bigger than death. And that trust, that power over death, is exactly what fuels the massive theme at the end of this chapter. God's absolutely unstoppable plan to build his family out of people from every corner of the earth. So after some of the local leaders reject Paul's message, he turns to the non-Jews. And then we get this absolutely stunning line. And as many as were appointed to eternal life believed. Whoa. That is a bold, bold statement about God's control, his sovereignty, and it plugs directly into this huge idea that runs like a golden thread through the whole Bible, what scholars call remnant theology. So, what's remnant theology? It's basically this idea you see again and again in the Bible. No matter how bad things get, no matter how much people mess up, God always keeps a small, faithful group, a remnant, to keep his plan moving. Think about it. After the fall, there's a promise. After the flood, there's Noah's family. After the Tower of Babel scatters everyone, there's Abraham. And now, in Acts 13, that whole plan kicks into high gear, and God starts calling that remnant out of all the nations.
This chapter really is the turning point. It's where God's plan switches from defense to offense. He's not just preserving a people. He's actively going out and sovereignly grabbing people from every nation, every language, to bring them into his family. He is literally reclaiming the world.
But okay, that immediately brings up the big question, the one that people have debated for thousands of years. If God is appointing people, what about our free will? How do those two things work together? Well, the theologian Dr. Michael Heiser uses this brilliant analogy to help us think about it. He calls it the divine chess match. Okay, picture two different versions of God playing chess with you. God number one says, okay, we're playing, but I've pre-programmed all your moves to guarantee I win. Now God number two says, you know what, move wherever you want. I don't care. Make any move you can possibly think of. I'm still gonna win. Now, which God is greater? It's the second one, right? The God who wins not by taking away your freedom and turning you into a puppet, but by being so incredibly smart and sovereign that his plan works no matter what you choose. And that, right there, is the absolutely mind-bending vision we get from Acts 13. It's a picture of a God whose sovereignty isn't about crushing our freedom, but is so perfect it works with our freedom. His plan isn't some rigid script where we're all just robots. No, it's more like a divine strategy, a masterpiece so brilliant it can handle any move we make and still bring about his ultimate purpose for the world. It's just incredible to think about.